The flames reached 12 feet high before anyone realized the house was already lost. Orange light danced against the night sky, casting shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. The heat was so intense that the air itself seemed to shimmer and bend. Fire engines lined the suburban street, their red and white lights painting the neighborhood in alternating waves of color and darkness. Firefighters moved with practiced urgency, their boots heavy against the pavement, their voices sharp and commanding above the roar of the blaze. In the center of this chaos stood a man in boxer shorts and a smoke-stained t-shirt. His bare feet were black with soot. His hands hung at his sides, useless and trembling. He wasn't watching the house anymore. He was watching the tree line at the edge of his yard, where the darkness swallowed everything beyond the reach of the fire's glow. "Sir, you need to step back. My dog," he whispered. His voice was barely audible over the crackling of burning wood. "My dog went back in." The firefighter paused, his hand still on the man's shoulder. Behind them, a window on the second floor exploded outward, sending a shower of glass fragments into the yard like falling stars. The flames surged through the opening, hungry and wild. But what the dog dragged out wasn't just something worth saving. It was something that would change everything they thought they knew about loyalty, instinct, and the invisible threads that bind lives together. Thomas Brennan had lived in the white colonial on Maple Drive for 11 years. It was the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a catalog. Blue shutters, a wide front porch, a mailbox shaped like a small barn. The lawn was always mowed. The hedges were always trimmed. Neighbors waved when they drove past. Children played in the cul-de-sac until the streetlights came on. Inside, the house smelled like coffee in the morning and lavender at night. There were photographs on every wall, family vacations, birthday parties, a wedding from 20 years ago, back when Thomas still had hair and his wife still smiled with her whole face. But that was before. Now, at 47 years old, Thomas lived alone. The photographs remained, but he'd stopped looking at them. The house was too big for one person, but he couldn't bring himself to sell it. This was where they'd raised Emma. This was where they'd celebrated every milestone, weathered every storm, built a life that felt permanent and unshakable, until it wasn't. The only constant now was Ranger. Ranger was a German Shepherd mix, 7 years old, with a black and tan coat and eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. Thomas had adopted him from a shelter 3 years ago, during the worst months of his life. The dog had been scheduled for euthanasia. Too old, too large, too much energy for most families to handle. But when Thomas walked past his kennel, Ranger had simply sat down and stared at him. No barking, no jumping, just a calm, steady gaze that somehow said, "I've been waiting for you." They'd been inseparable ever since. Every morning, Ranger waited by the front door while Thomas tied his running shoes. They'd jog through the neighborhood together, Ranger's pace matching Thomas's exactly, never pulling on the leash, never lagging behind. When Thomas worked from home, Ranger lay beneath his desk, a warm presence against his feet. At night, the dog slept on a thick mat beside Thomas's bed, his breathing slow and even, a rhythm that helped Thomas fall asleep when his mind wouldn't stop racing. People in the neighborhood knew them both by name. The mailman always kept dog treats in his pocket. The woman at the coffee shop on the corner would fill a small bowl with water, while Thomas ordered his usual black coffee. Children would ask if they could pet him, and Ranger would sit patiently, his tail wagging in slow, gentle arcs, while small hands patted his head. "You're lucky," the woman next door had said once, watching Ranger wait perfectly still while Thomas loaded groceries from the car. "That dog would do anything for you," Thomas had smiled, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "I think it's the other way around." He meant it. There were days when the silence in the house felt suffocating, days when the absence of voices, of laughter, of life pressed down on him like a physical weight. On those days, Ranger would rest his head on Thomas's knee, his dark eyes full of something that felt like understanding, and somehow that was enough to keep going. The night of November 14th started like any other. Thomas came home from work just after 7. The sun had already set, and the temperature was dropping fast. November in Pennsylvania meant early darkness and the metallic smell of impending snow. He unlocked the front door, and Ranger greeted him the way he always did, tail wagging, a single soft bark of welcome, then a full body lean against Thomas's legs. "Hey, buddy." Thomas set his keys on the small table by the door. "Hungry?" Ranger's ears perked up. He trotted toward the kitchen, his nails clicking against the hardwood floor. Thomas followed, pulling off his jacket and draping it over the back of a chair. The kitchen was small but functional. White cabinets, dark countertops, a window above the sink that looked out into the backyard where a bird feeder hung from a low branch of the oak tree. He filled Ranger's bowl with kibble and set it down. The dog ate slowly, methodically, the way he always did. Thomas opened the refrigerator and stared at the contents without really seeing them. Half a carton of eggs, a container of leftover pasta, a six-pack of beer with 2 bottles missing. He wasn't hungry. Instead, he grabbed a beer and walked into the living room. The television was off. The room was quiet except for the hum of the furnace kicking on. Thomas sat on the couch, the leather creaking beneath his weight, and took a long drink. Ranger finished eating and padded into the room. He sat in front of Thomas, studying him with that same calm, knowing gaze. "What?" Thomas said, though there was no edge to his voice. "I'm fine." Ranger tilted his head slightly, unconvinced. Thomas reached out and scratched the dog's neck, his fingers working through the thick fur. "I'm fine," he said again, quieter this time. The truth was he wasn't sure. Some days were easier than others. Some days the house didn't feel so empty, but tonight the silence felt heavier. The walls seemed closer. The absence of another person, another voice, another heartbeat felt impossible to ignore. He finished the beer and set the bottle on the coffee table. "Come on," he said, standing. "Let's get some air." They went out the back door, into the yard. The grass was cold and damp beneath Thomas's bare feet, but he didn't care. The sky was clear, dotted with stars that seemed impossibly far away. Ranger sniffed along the fence line, investigating the usual spots with the focused attention of a detective. Thomas leaned against the porch railing and breathed in the night air. It smelled like wood smoke. Someone nearby must have lit a fireplace. The scent was comforting, familiar. It reminded him of childhood, of winters when his father would build a fire every evening, and the whole house would smell like burning cedar. "Time to go in, Ranger." The dog trotted back to him, tail still wagging. They went inside and Thomas locked the door behind them. Upstairs, Thomas brushed his teeth and changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants. Ranger waited in the hallway, then followed him into the bedroom. The dog circled twice on his mat before lying down with a contented sigh. Thomas climbed into bed and turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the branches of the oak tree against the side of the house. He closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep, and for a while, everything was still. The smell came first. Not the sharp, immediate stench of smoke, but something subtler, something wrong. It crept into Thomas's dreams, twisting them into something unsettling. He was walking through a forest. The trees were burning, but there was no sound, no crackling, no roar of flames, just heat and silence, and the acrid smell of charred wood. He woke with a start. The room was dark, but not completely. There was a faint orange glow seeping in from beneath the bedroom door. For a moment, Thomas's sleep-fogged brain couldn't process what he was seeing. A streetlight, a car's headlights. Then he smelled it. Smoke, thick and chemical and wrong. He threw off the covers and stumbled out of bed. Ranger was already on his feet, ears forward, body tense. Thomas crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled open the bedroom door. Heat hit him like a physical force. The hallway was filled with smoke, thick and grey, rolling along the ceiling in dense clouds. At the far end of the hall, near the staircase, he could see the flicker of flames, orange, yellow, moving. His mind went blank with panic. "Fire!" he said aloud, as if saying it would make it real. "There's a fire!" Ranger barked once, sharp and urgent. Thomas's training kicked in, the safety drills from grade school, the fire safety videos he'd watched at work. "Get out! Get out now! Don't stop! Don't go back!" He grabbed Ranger's collar and pulled the dog toward the stairs. The smoke was thicker now, stinging his eyes, burning his throat. He couldn't see the bottom of the staircase, couldn't see anything except the glow of flames somewhere below. "Come on, Ranger, come on!" They descended together, Thomas's hand on the railing. Ranger pressed against his leg. The heat was unbearable. The air was suffocating. Every breath felt like swallowing glass. At the bottom of the stairs, Thomas could see the source. The living room was engulfed. Flames climbed the walls, consuming the curtains, the furniture, the photographs. The fire moved with terrifying speed, feeding on everything it touched. The front door was 15 feet away. Thomas ran. He didn't remember unlocking it, didn't remember turning the handle. He only remembered the sudden rush of cold air, the relief of it, the way it filled his lungs and made him realize how close he'd come to suffocating. He stumbled onto the front lawn, coughing violently, his eyes streaming. Ranger was beside him, panting hard but unharmed. Behind them, the house roared. Thomas turned and stared. Flames poured out of the living room windows. Smoke billowed into the sky, black and thick, blotting out the stars. The heat was so intense that he could feel it from 30 feet away. Neighbors were emerging from their houses now, their faces pale with shock. Someone was shouting. Someone else was on the phone. Thomas stood frozen, his mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. His house was burning. Everything inside, every photograph, every piece of furniture, every memory was being destroyed, and there was nothing he could do. The fire trucks arrived within 7 minutes. Thomas counted. He stood barefoot on the cold grass, watching as firefighters unrolled hoses and shouted commands to each other. The street filled with flashing lights and the wail of sirens. More neighbors gathered, their faces illuminated by the flames. A firefighter approached Thomas, his face obscured by his helmet and mask. "Is anyone else inside?" Thomas shook his head. "Just me. I got out. My dog got out." "You're sure? No one else?" "I'm sure." The firefighter nodded and turned back toward the house. Another crew was already moving toward the front door, their hoses ready, their movements coordinated and efficient. Thomas felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see his neighbor, Margaret, her gray hair uncombed, her bathrobe tied hastily around her waist. "Thomas, oh my God, are you okay?" He nodded, though he wasn't sure it was true. "Do you need anything? Water? A blanket?" "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. His hands were shaking. His throat burned. His chest felt tight, not from the smoke but from something else. Shock, maybe. Or grief. Ranger pressed against his leg, warm and solid. Thomas reached down and rested his hand on the dog's head. "Good boy," he murmured. "Good boy. You're okay." Ranger looked up at him, then back at the house. And that's when Thomas noticed it. The dog wasn't calm. His ears were back. His body was tense, coiled. His eyes were fixed on the house, unblinking. "Ranger?" The dog whined, a low, anxious sound. "It's okay, buddy. We're out. We're safe." But Ranger didn't relax. He took a step forward toward the house, his nose twitching. "Ranger, no, stay." The dog ignored him. He took another step, then another. His whine grew louder, more desperate. "Ranger, stay." But the dog was already moving, not walking, running, straight toward the burning house. Thomas's heart stopped. "Ranger, no!" He lunged forward, but the dog was faster. Ranger bolted across the yard, his powerful legs propelling him toward the open front door, where firefighters were directing water into the inferno. "Stop him!" Thomas screamed. "Somebody stop him!" One of the firefighters turned, saw the dog, and moved to block the entrance. But Ranger was too quick. He darted to the side, slipping past the firefighter's reach, and disappeared into the smoke. "No, no, no, no!" Thomas started running, but 2 firefighters grabbed him, their grips iron strong. "Sir, you can't go in there. My dog just went inside." "Sir, we'll get him, but you need to stay back. He doesn't understand. He'll die in there." Thomas thrashed against their hold, but they didn't let go. One of them spoke into his radio, his voice calm and professional despite the chaos. "We have a dog inside the structure, requesting immediate search." The words felt meaningless. Immediate. Search. They might as well have been speaking another language. All Thomas could see was the doorway, the smoke pouring out of it, the flames visible just beyond the threshold. Ranger was in there. His dog, his friend, his companion, the only living thing that made the loneliness bearable, was inside a burning building. "Please," Thomas whispered. His voice broke. "Please get him out." The firefighters holding him said nothing. Their faces were grim behind their masks. On the radio, voices crackled. "Copy that. Team 2, you're closest. Can you locate the animal?" "Negative. Visibility is 0. We're focused on structure integrity." "Sir, we're doing everything we can," one of the firefighters said to Thomas. "But right now, our priority is making sure the fire doesn't spread." "I don't care about the house," Thomas's voice was raw. "I don't care, just find him." The firefighter's grip on his arm tightened, not unkindly. "We will, but you need to let us work." Thomas stopped struggling. There was no point. He couldn't go in. He couldn't help. All he could do was stand there and watch and wait and pray. The seconds stretched into minutes. The fire raged, and Ranger didn't come out. The incident commander, a broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples, approached Thomas. His face was streaked with soot, his expression serious but not unkind. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Captain Alvarez. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." Thomas nodded, numb. Is there any chance someone else is inside? A family member, a friend? No, it's just me. You're absolutely certain? Yes, I live alone. It's just me and my dog. Alvarez studied him for a moment, then nodded. He spoke into his radio again. All teams, confirmed single occupant plus one animal. Continue suppression efforts. Structural collapse is imminent on the west side. Structural collapse. The words hit Thomas like a punch to the chest. If the house collapsed while Ranger was inside, Captain, please. Thomas's voice was barely audible. He's all I have. Alvarez's expression softened slightly. We're aware there's an animal inside. My team will look for him. But I need you to understand. Our first priority is safety. If the structure becomes too dangerous, we will pull our people out. But, no buts, Mr. Brennan. I'm not losing one of my firefighters for a dog. The words were harsh, but Thomas understood. He hated it, but he understood. He turned back toward the house, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Smoke continued to pour from the windows. The flames were visible on the second floor now, eating through the roof. Come on, Ranger, he whispered. Come on, boy, get out, please get out. But there was no sign of movement, no bark, no flash of black and tan fur, just smoke and fire, and the terrible, crushing weight of helplessness. Margaret appeared beside him again, holding a blanket. She draped it over his shoulders without a word. Thomas hadn't realized he was shaking. He'll come out, she said quietly. Dogs are smart. He'll find his way. Thomas wanted to believe her, but he'd seen the smoke, the flames, the chaos inside. Ranger was smart, yes, but he was also loyal to a fault. And if he'd gone back in for something, if he thought there was something worth saving, he wouldn't leave until he had it. That's what terrified Thomas most. Not that Ranger was lost, but that he was looking for something. Another window exploded. Glass rained down onto the front lawn, glittering in the firelight. Firefighters repositioned their hoses, aiming at the new outbreak. The house groaned, a deep, ominous sound that made everyone stop and look. West wall is buckling, someone shouted. Pull back, everyone pull back. The firefighters retreated, dragging their hoses with them. The house seemed to shudder, like a living thing in its death throes. Thomas took an involuntary step forward. Ranger! And then, through the smoke, he saw movement. A shape, low to the ground, moving through the doorway. There! Thomas pointed, his voice breaking. There! He's coming out! The firefighters turned. One of them moved forward, ready to assist. Ranger emerged from the smoke like a ghost materializing from fog. His fur was singed and blackened with soot. His tongue hung from his mouth, panting hard. But he was moving. He was alive. And he was dragging something. At first, Thomas couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. Ranger was pulling something heavy. His teeth were clamped around fabric, something dark and bulky. He moved slowly, his body low, his muscles straining with effort. A firefighter reached him first, kneeling down. Easy, boy, easy. Ranger didn't let go. He pulled whatever he was carrying clear of the doorway, out onto the front lawn, away from the heat and smoke. Only then did he release his grip and collapse onto his side, his chest heaving. Thomas broke free from the hands holding him and ran. He dropped to his knees beside Ranger, his hands moving over the dog's body, checking for injuries. Ranger! Ranger, are you okay? Talk to me, buddy. The dog's eyes were half closed, exhausted, but his tail gave a weak thump against the ground. He's okay, one of the firefighters said, kneeling beside them. Smoke inhalation, maybe some burns, but he's breathing. We need to get him oxygen. What did he... Thomas looked at the object Ranger had been dragging. It was a jacket, dark blue, heavy canvas, the kind worn by utility workers. Thomas stared at it, confused. He didn't recognize it. It wasn't his. The firefighter picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hands. His expression changed. Captain, you need to see this. Alvarez jogged over, his face grim. What is it? The firefighter held up the jacket. There was something inside it wrapped in the fabric. No, not something. Someone. Thomas's blood turned to ice. The firefighter unfolded the jacket carefully, and what emerged made several of the surrounding first responders gasp. A child, small, maybe 4 years old, maybe 5. A little girl with dark hair and a face streaked with soot. Her eyes were closed. Her body was limp. Oh my God, Margaret whispered behind Thomas. Alvarez moved with swift precision. Medic! We need a medic now! 2 paramedics sprinted forward, equipment in hand. They lowered the child onto the grass and immediately began assessing her vitals. Pulse is weak but present. She's breathing, barely. Get the oxygen on her, now. Thomas couldn't move, couldn't speak. His mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There was a child in his house. A child he didn't know existed. A child his dog had just saved from a fire. One of the paramedics looked up at Alvarez. "She's alive, Captain. She needs a hospital now. Go, move!" They lifted the little girl onto a stretcher and rushed toward the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, and the vehicle tore off down the street, sirens blaring. Alvarez turned to Thomas. His expression was no longer just serious. It was sharp, interrogative. "Mr. Brennan, who is that child?" Thomas shook his head, still kneeling beside Ranger. "I don't know." "You don't know? I've never seen her before in my life. She was inside your house. I know, I don't understand. I live alone. I don't have children. I don't have..." His voice broke. "I don't know who she is." Alvarez exchanged a glance with another officer who had just arrived. The officer's hand moved to the radio on his shoulder. "This is Officer Parsons. We have a situation at 428 Maple Drive. Unconscious minor recovered from the scene. Possible unlawful entry or endangerment. Requesting detective support." Thomas's heart hammered in his chest. They thought he'd done something. They thought he'd hurt her. I swear to God, I didn't know she was there." "Then how did she get into your house, Mr. Brennan?" "I don't know." Ranger whimpered and shifted, trying to lift his head. Thomas instinctively reached out, stroking the dog's neck. "It's okay, boy. You did good. You did so good." Alvarez crouched down, his eyes level with Thomas's. "We're going to figure this out. But right now I need you to think. Has anyone else been in your house recently? Any workers? Any visitors?" Thomas forced himself to think through the panic. "No, I mean, the mail comes, deliveries sometimes, but no one's been inside. Doors and windows locked?" "Yes, always." "Do you have a basement?" "Yes, but..." Thomas stopped. The basement. The old bulkhead entrance on the side of the house. He'd noticed it was loose a few weeks ago, but he'd kept meaning to fix it and never got around to it. "The bulkhead," he said. "The basement entrance. It's been broken. Someone could have gotten in through there." Alvarez stood and spoke into his radio. "Check the basement entrance, possible point of entry." Within seconds, 2 firefighters moved around the side of the house. "Captain," one of them called, "the bulkhead's open. Looks like it's been forced." Thomas felt sick. Someone had broken into his house. Someone had been inside, possibly for hours, maybe longer, and he hadn't known. More police arrived. The scene transformed from a fire rescue into a criminal investigation. Yellow tape went up. Officers began canvassing the area, knocking on doors, asking questions. Thomas sat on the curb, the blanket still around his shoulders, Ranger lying beside him. A paramedic had checked the dog over. Mild smoke inhalation, minor burns on his paws, but nothing critical. They'd given him oxygen and water. He would be okay. But Thomas couldn't shake the image of that little girl, her pale face, her closed eyes, her small body wrapped in a jacket that didn't belong to him. Who was she? An officer approached. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a notebook in her hand. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Detective Laura Chen. I need to ask you some questions." Thomas nodded. "Can you walk me through your evening? What time did you come home?" "Around 7. I let Ranger out in the backyard. We came back in. I went to bed around 10:30. Did you notice anything unusual? Any sounds, any smells?" Thomas thought back. The house had been quiet, normal, except the smoke, he said. "I smelled smoke in my sleep. That's what woke me up." "What time was that?" "I don't know. Maybe 1:30? 2? Chen made a note. "And you didn't hear anyone? Didn't see anyone?" "No. I went straight for the stairs. The fire was already spreading." "And your dog went back in on his own?" "Yes, I tried to stop him, but..." Thomas's voice caught. He wouldn't listen. He just ran inside. Chen studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Brennan, do you have any children?" "No." "Ever?" The question hit like a blade. "I had a daughter, Emma. She passed away 4 years ago." Chen's expression softened. "I'm sorry." Thomas said nothing. "Is there anyone who might want to hurt you? Anyone with a grudge? An ex-partner, maybe?" "No. My ex-wife and I haven't spoken in years. We didn't end badly, we just couldn't..." He stopped. He didn't owe this woman his life story. Chen nodded. "Okay, we're going to need you to come down to the station once we're done here, just to get a formal statement." "Am I a suspect?" "Right now, you're a witness, but we need to understand what happened here." An hour passed, then 2. The fire was finally under control, though the house was a total loss. The roof had caved in. The walls were blackened and unstable. Everything Thomas owned, every photo, every piece of furniture, every memento, was gone. But none of that mattered. All he could think about was the little girl. Finally, Alvarez returned. His expression was grim. "The child is stable. She's at County General. She's going to make it." Thomas exhaled, relief washing over him like a wave. "But we still don't know who she is," Alvarez continued. "No ID, no reports of missing children in the area. We're running prints and checking with social services. How did she end up in my house? We don't know yet, but there's something else." Alvarez paused. "We found evidence of a camp in your basement. Blankets, food wrappers. It looks like someone was living down there." Thomas felt the ground tilt beneath him. "Living there for how long? We're not sure. Days, maybe. Possibly longer. Someone had been living in his house, sleeping beneath him, hiding, and he'd had no idea." By dawn, the neighborhood was quiet again. The fire trucks had left. The police remained, their vehicles parked along the curb, officers moving in and out of the ruins. Thomas sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket over his shoulders, Ranger at his feet. The dog's eyes were closed, his breathing slow and steady. The paramedics had said he'd be fine. He just needed rest. Thomas envied him. Detective Chen approached, a coffee cup in each hand. She offered one to Thomas. "Thought you could use this." He took it, grateful. The warmth seeped into his hands, grounding him. "We have more information," Chen said, sitting beside him. "The little girl is awake. She's scared and confused, but she's talking." "What did she say?" "Her name is Sophia. She's 5 years old. She was with her mother." Thomas's chest tightened. "Her mother?" Chen nodded. "A woman named Elena Ruiz, 28 years old. She's undocumented. She's been homeless for the past 3 months. And she was hiding in my house. Yes, she found the broken bulkhead. She and her daughter needed shelter. It's been cold at night. She thought..." Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. "She thought if she stayed in the basement, you wouldn't notice." Thomas set the coffee down, his hands shaking. "She had a child, a 5-year-old, and she was living in my basement. She was desperate, Mr. Brennan. I'm not saying it was right, but people do extreme things when they're trying to survive." "Where is she now?" Chen hesitated. "We found her body on the first floor near the kitchen." The world stopped. "She's dead?" "Yes. The medical examiner believes she died from smoke inhalation. She tried to get out, but..." Chen's voice softened. "She didn't make it." Thomas felt like he'd been punched in the gut. A woman had died in his house. A mother, trying to protect her child. "Sophia doesn't know yet," Chen added quietly. "We're working with child services to find the best way to tell her." The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Thomas gave his statement at the police station. He answered every question, recounted every detail. No, he hadn't known anyone was in the house. No, he'd never met Elena Ruiz. No, he didn't blame himself, except he did. If he'd fixed the bulkhead, if he'd been more aware, if he'd checked the basement even once in the past few weeks, maybe Elena would still be alive. Maybe Sophia wouldn't be an orphan. By noon, Thomas was back at the scene. There was nothing left to salvage. The house was a blackened husk, cordoned off with yellow tape. He stood on the sidewalk, staring at the ruins, trying to reconcile the place he'd lived for 11 years with the charred skeleton in front of him. Margaret approached, holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "I made this for you," she said. "I know it's not much, but thank you." She set the dish in his hands, then pulled him into a hug. Thomas stood stiffly, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to being comforted. "That dog of yours is a hero," Margaret said, pulling back. "Do you know that? He saved that little girl's life." Thomas looked down at Ranger, who was sitting at his feet. The dog's fur was still singed, his paws bandaged, but his eyes were alert, watching Thomas with that same steady, knowing gaze. "Yeah," Thomas said quietly. He did. That night, Thomas stayed in a motel on the outskirts of town. The room was small and sterile, with thin walls and a bed that smelled faintly of bleach. Ranger lay on the floor beside him, too tired to even lift his head. Thomas stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He kept seeing Sophia's face, her closed eyes, her small body wrapped in a jacket that wasn't hers. He kept thinking about Elena, a woman he'd never met, who'd been desperate enough to break into his house, who'd tried so hard to keep her daughter safe, and he kept thinking about Ranger. How had the dog known? How had he known to go back? How had he known where to find Sophia? Dogs didn't think like that. They didn't reason, didn't plan. They acted on instinct. But Ranger had done more than act on instinct. He'd made a choice. He'd gone into a burning building and dragged a child to safety. And in doing so, he'd saved a life. The news broke the next morning. Local stations picked up the story first. Hero dog saves child from burning home. The headlines spread quickly. By afternoon, it had gone regional. By evening, national. Thomas's phone rang constantly. Reporters, producers, people asking for interviews, for photos, for his story. He ignored all of them, but the attention didn't stop. Someone had set up a fundraising page for Sophia to cover her medical expenses and help her find a new home. Within 24 hours, it had raised over $50,000. Another page appeared, this one for Thomas. Help Thomas rebuild. He hadn't asked for it, but his neighbors had organized it anyway. The donations poured in, and Ranger became something more than just a dog. Photos of him circulated online. Soot-covered, bandaged, lying on the lawn with his head on Thomas's knee. People called him a hero, a miracle, proof that dogs were better than people. Thomas didn't read the comments, didn't watch the news segments. He just wanted quiet. But on the third day, Detective Chen called. "Mr. Brennan, I thought you should know. We've located Sophia's family." Thomas sat up, his heart racing. Family? An aunt, Elena's sister. She lives in Ohio. She didn't even know Eleanor and Sophia were missing. She's coming to pick Sophia up. Will she be okay? With the aunt? Yes. The aunt is married, stable income, 2 kids of her own. Sophia will be taken care of. Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, maybe, or something close to it. And Eleanor's body. The family is arranging for her to be buried. There will be a service next week. If you'd like to attend, I would, Thomas said. I'd like to be there. The funeral was small. Just the aunt, her husband, a priest, and a handful of people from the local immigrant community who'd known Elena. Thomas stood in the back, Ranger at his side, feeling like an intruder. But when the service ended, the aunt approached him. She was young, early 30s maybe, with the same dark hair as Elena, the same tired eyes. "Mr. Brennan?" "Yes. I wanted to thank you." Thomas shook his head. "I didn't do anything. Your dog did." She looked down at Ranger, her eyes filling with tears. "He saved my niece. He gave her a chance to live." Thomas didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry about your sister." The aunt nodded, wiping her eyes. "She was trying so hard. She didn't have anywhere to go. She was scared. Scared of being deported, scared of losing Sophia." She paused. "I wish she'd called me. I would have helped. I'm sure she knew that. I hope so." They stood in silence for a moment. Then the aunt reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph. She handed it to Thomas. It was a picture of Elena and Sophia. They were smiling, standing in front of a playground. Sophia was holding an ice cream cone. Elena's arm was around her daughter's shoulders. "I thought you should have this," the aunt said, "so you can remember, so you know who she was." Thomas took the photograph, his throat tight. "Thank you." The aunt nodded, then walked away. Thomas stood there for a long time, staring at the photo, at Eleanor's smile. At the way Sophia's eyes crinkled with joy. 2 lives, one saved, one lost. And all because of a dog who'd refused to leave anyone behind. 3 weeks later, Thomas moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It was temporary, just until he figured out what came next. The insurance company was still processing his claim. The police had closed the investigation, ruling the fire accidental. A faulty wire in the living room wall, sparked by age and neglect. Elena hadn't caused the fire. She'd been a victim of it, just like Sophia, just like Thomas. The apartment was furnished but sparse. A couch, a bed, a small kitchen table. It didn't feel like home, but Ranger didn't seem to mind. As long as they were together, the dog was content. Thomas spent his days looking for work, applying for loans, trying to rebuild. At night, he sat on the couch with Ranger beside him, staring at the photograph of Elena and Sophia. He'd framed it, put it on the windowsill where the light hit it just right. He didn't know why. He just felt like he owed it to them, to remember. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Thomas opened it to find a woman standing in the hallway, mid-30s, professional clothes, a warm smile. "Mr. Brennan?" "Yes? My name is Dr. Sarah Lindstrom. I'm a veterinary behaviorist. I've been following your story. I was wondering if I could talk to you for a few minutes." Thomas hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." She entered, glancing around the small apartment before her eyes landed on Ranger, who was lying on his mat by the window. "That's him?" she asked. "Yeah, that's Ranger." Dr. Lindstrom knelt down, moving slowly and carefully. Ranger lifted his head, sniffed her hand, then allowed her to scratch behind his ears. "He's remarkable," she said. "What he did, It's incredibly rare. I know. Do you mind if I ask you some questions about his behavior, his training? Thomas shrugged. He doesn't have any formal training. I adopted him from a shelter. He's a good dog. Has he ever done anything like this before? Acted protectively, shown unusual awareness of danger. Thomas thought back. Not like this. But he's always been aware. He notices things I don't, reacts to things before I do. Dr. Lindstrom nodded, making notes. Dogs have abilities we're only beginning to understand. Scent detection, emotional reading, spatial awareness. What Ranger did that night wasn't just instinct. It was decision-making, problem-solving. He went into a burning building, located a child, and brought her to safety. Why, though? Why would he do that? Because he's bonded to you, and because he sensed that something was wrong. Dogs can detect fear, distress, even chemical changes in the air. He knew someone was in danger, and he acted. Thomas looked at Ranger, who was watching him with those calm, intelligent eyes. He's special, Dr. Lindstrom said. I'd like to study him if you're open to it. Not invasively, just behavioral observations. I think he could teach us a lot about canine cognition. Thomas considered this. Then he nodded. Okay, but nothing that hurts him. Of course not, just observations. She stood, pulling a business card from her pocket. Call me when you're ready. And Mr. Brennan? Yeah? You should be proud. Most people wouldn't have gotten out. And Ranger, he's the reason Sophia is still alive. 6 months later, Thomas received a letter. It was postmarked from Ohio. Inside was a handwritten note and a photograph. The note read, Dear Mr. Brennan, I wanted to send you an update on Sophia. She's doing well. She started kindergarten last month. She talks about your dog all the time. She calls him her angel. I know this has been hard for everyone, but I wanted you to know that Sophia is safe. She's loved, and she remembers. Thank you for everything. Maria Ruiz. The photograph showed Sophia standing in front of a school, wearing a pink backpack and a bright smile. She looked happy, healthy, alive. Thomas pinned the photo next to the one of Elena and Sophia. 2 moments, 2 lives, connected by a single night of fire and fear and impossible courage. That evening, Thomas took Ranger for a walk. They went to the park, where the dog could run freely, where the world felt open and uncomplicated. Ranger chased a tennis ball, his legs strong and sure, his tail wagging in wide, joyful arcs. Thomas watched, a small smile tugging at his lips. People still recognized them sometimes. Strangers would stop, ask if that was the hero dog, ask to take a photo. Thomas usually declined. This wasn't about fame. It wasn't about recognition. It was about one simple truth. Sometimes the things we love surprise us. Sometimes they're capable of more than we ever imagined. Ranger returned, dropping the ball at Thomas's feet. His tongue lolled out, his eyes bright. Thomas picked up the ball and threw it again, and as he watched the dog run, he thought about Elena, about Sophia, about the fragile threads that connect all of us, about how easily they can break, and how sometimes they hold. The sun was setting. The sky turned orange and gold, the same colors as the fire that had taken so much and revealed so much more. Thomas called Ranger back. The dog came immediately, sitting at his feet, looking up with that steady, knowing gaze. Good boy, Thomas said, running his hand through the dog's fur. You're a good boy. And in that moment, in the fading light of a quiet evening, Thomas understood something he hadn't before. He'd thought he'd saved Ranger when he adopted him from that shelter 3 years ago, but the truth was, Ranger had saved him long before the fire ever started. Some bonds are forged in ordinary moments, morning runs, quiet evenings, the simple presence of another living thing. But some bonds are tested by fire, and those are the ones that prove unbreakable. Thomas and Ranger walked home together, the park fading behind them, the future stretching ahead, uncertain, difficult, but no longer empty. Because sometimes, loyalty isn't measured in words or promises. It's measured in action, in sacrifice, in the willingness to run into the flames when everyone else is running out. And in a world that often feels cold and disconnected, that kind of love, selfless, instinctive, unwavering, is the rarest and most precious thing of all. Sometimes heroes wear badges, sometimes they carry hoses and axes, and sometimes they walk on 4 paws and ask for nothing in return except the chance to be by your side forever.